Testing audio, testing audio. Testing audio, testing audio. Let's see if the Stream Deck. Hey, everybody, look at that. The Stream Deck's actually working. Man, I've had some really, really weird problems with the Stream Deck working on the Mac with Streamlabs OBS. How you doing, everybody? Happy Friday. My name's Aaron LeBeau. I'm a developer advocate at Couchbase. I'm wearing my using Microsoft.Maui shirt today because we're doing some ASP.NET coding today. Actually, we're going to do a bunch of different things. That's my plan in the stream today, not just ASP.NET coding, but go through a concept. Talk a little bit about what gamification is and why it's a pretty cool topic. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, and why I want to try to build an open source gamification engine that I can throw on the internet and anybody could use if they want to. That seems like a pretty cool idea. So, one of the cool things is Microsoft announced a new version of their beta of their Visual Studio product, and I've been using this stream as an excuse to go play with it because of the fact that I used to write a lot of C# code, but haven't lately. In fact, when I say lately, it's been about a year since I've done any serious ASP.NET enterprise development. Maybe even a little bit, about closer to a year and a half, probably. Well, let's see. No, about a year. Had to think back to when I last used it on a project at my previous employer. It's a pretty cool framework. I do like it. There's other things, to build APIs. If you're a JavaScript developer, Node and Express is pretty popular. Obviously, if you're over in the Android world and you're doing Java or Kotlin, Spring is a framework that you can use to write APIs and put them on servers. And so if you have the Kotlin or Java background, that's a pretty great framework for building APIs. And on Python, oh man, there's a lot of them. I used Flask in the past. It works pretty good. I wrote the tutorials for Couchbase on Flask, the beginning ones on our developer portal. It's okay. It's not bad. I like it. Obviously, .NET we have, that's what we're working on today. So I'm not saying that there's any one best way to make APIs. I like .NET a lot, so I do build APIs from time to time in that, but I've also built APIs in our platforms, and I'm here to admit that there's no one best one. It's usually a team effort, so my recommendation is build APIs and with whatever your team knows. If your team is a bunch of Java developers, build in Java. If your team is full of Kotlin developers, build with Kotlin. If your team's a .NET team, and then build with .NET. So, but I'm using this stream as an excuse to play around C#. So this will be a .NET stream today. Now, they recently announced that the new version of Visual Studio 22's beta had support for RC2. I'm going to say do not upgrade to RC2 right now. I did, and my .NET disappeared. .NET is the command line tool that's used to run .NET. Now, they do warn you in the release notes. I had to look this up right before the stream started because literally about an hour before the stream I did all this, and then mini panic attack when my .NET command was not working anymore. I was like, oh no, did I ruin everything? But when I looked on the requirements here, they kind of warn you that the RC2 is supported Intel Macs, but must be installed manually. They do say that the RC2 Visual Studio for Mac support on the M1 processor architect. So I am running on a Mac Mini right now, and I think that could be possible. Now, I installed the Intel version. I have the download for the Intel version. But for whatever reason, it deleted like all my .NETs, or basically the .NET command. I don't know what it did, but I couldn't find anything after doing that. So I very quickly reverted back to Preview 1, and I went to my command line and started doing like the most simple thing that I like to do is a which on the command line. Now, the which command is a Unix command. It'll tell you where something's installed, if it's in something called your path. And so that's what I was looking for, because I wanted to see, hey, is this thing still installed on my computer? Where did they move some bits around and stuff? It's now installed since I put Preview 1 back in. Now, if you want to see which version you have, you could do that by just going into the SDK directory and do a ls-la, and this will show you every version of the .NET framework you have installed on your Mac. And in Windows, I'm sure there's, I think it's in Program Files. It's somewhere in there. There's probably a place where it is. I am not doing Windows on this, so this is a Mac, pretty much a Mac stream. So if you're on Windows, sorry, but there is equivalent location where you can find all the .NET frameworks. And there's something called the GC, the global cache of, what's it called in Windows now? The assembly cache that basically all the .NET stuff lives inside of. And so that you can find that also in the Windows folder. Windows gets a lot more complicated when it comes to .NET because there's .NET Framework versus .NET Core. And I know that's really confusing. But this is not a .NET lesson today. Instead, we are just going to write some stuff. But I want to let you know that my recommendation right now, at least right before this stream, I tried to update to RC2, and it did not work for me. So I would recommend, if you're going to do that, make a backup, like a time machine backup, or be well aware and have RC1 re-downloaded so that if your RC2 breaks things, you can go and get RC1 back. And you can see here I have now all the versions I want. .NET 5, 3, 1, because this is .NET Core, of course. We're on a Mac, so we can't run the regular .NET framework. Of course, we've got RC1 here, which is going to be good enough for us today for programming APIs. So with that homework out, so a couple things I want to talk about real quick. starting today, I've got a schedule published on Twitch for my streams and what they're going to be about. So on Fridays and Saturdays, I'll be streaming about cloud and APIs. And it won't be just .NET. I'll be streaming on Kotlin, one of my favorite languages, probably my favorite language right now, to tell you the truth. I'll be doing some stuff with Spring Boot. I'll be doing some cloud stuff. I'll be doing some stuff with Python. And of course, .NET. So, I work in a lot of different languages. So the stream on these 2 days will be primarily in those languages, doing that kind of stuff. On Mondays and Wednesdays, however, I'll be switching it up and doing a bunch of mobile stuff. And starting this Monday, I'll be building an app in Swift. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to be doing it in AppKit to start out with. And I'm going to build the same app in Swift UI, and then we're going to compare the two, because that seems like that'd be a lot of fun. I am new to Swift UI. I've done some small screens in it and stuff, so I have a pretty good idea of how it works. However, I've done years of development in UIKit, AppKit is Mac, UIKit's for iOS. I've done years of development in UIKit. And I haven't done any serious, to tell you the truth, though, in a couple years, but it's like riding a bicycle. So I know a collection view, table views, how delegates work and all that kind of stuff. So it should be pretty easy to get up and running. I'm also probably going to use a storyboard for at least the UI kit stuff, obviously, because my goal is to try to make the app as fast as possible and make it something that's more likely something that, if you're building something, you would also have to maintenance. Second, while I drink some water. And storyboards and UI kit were really popular for many years, and they still are. And there's nothing wrong with building apps using that technology. Apple hasn't deprecated or anything like that. And I think that it's a cool piece of technology, and I think constraints get a bad rep. The reputation that constraints are hard, I think it's wrong. I think you just need to understand how they work. Once they work, it's like any technology, you can use it to advantage. Constraints also work in Android. Most people don't know this. There's a constraint system in Android, and you can use it there. And I use it in Android a lot, actually. Really popular when you have a text box. You want to get like an icon to a certain spot in the text box. Maybe you want to put a search icon on the right side of the text box. You can do constraints in Android, and that's actually a pretty easy exercise then. So the constraint system isn't just iOS. There's a very similar version to it in Android. And so I think that'll be fun, though, to do that. So Mondays and Wednesdays streams will be on mobile, and we'll be having some fun. We won't be just building Swift stuff. We'll have Kotlin. I'm a big fan of Kotlin. And, of course, Xamarin. That's where a lot of people probably know me from, as I was pretty popular in the Xamarin community for years. I was a tech lead at a very large, second largest accounting firm in the world, EY, for about 5 years, and did a lot of Xamarin development there. Did some native development, but did a lot of Xamarin development there. And I think Xamarin's also a pretty okay piece of technology. It's actually better than okay. It's pretty great. I truly still believe to this point in time, build software based on your skill set, right? If you know Swift, build it in Swift. If you know Kotlin, build it in Kotlin. If you're a JavaScript developer, React Native is pretty popular and pretty great. Flutter, I know, is getting a lot of reputation of being a pretty great way of building mobile apps, and I think that it's pretty cool. However, there's not a lot of Dart programmers out there that are just programming stuff, right? Dart's like kind of specialty language. So when you go into Flutter, you are going into a learning curve of learning a bunch of different things. That can be a little daunting at first. Probably no different than when you have to learn Swift if you're doing native iOS and you've never done Swift before. All right, so let's see here. So I was looking at the release notes for the latest release, and you can do these too. You can go to Microsoft and just Google Visual Studio for Mac 2022 and look for release notes, and they come up pretty quickly here. Also, they do have the downloads here on both for .NET and for the Visual Studio for Mac. So you can go in there and find those and get the downloads and all that kind of stuff. They also have some more details on GitHub if you do add the word GitHub to it. And they do have some blog articles out there that explain this in greater detail. My good friend Jordan is got a new blog post here that he did just a couple days ago, and letting people know that there's a that's available, and it's also going to work with the Intel Macs only here, as you can see here. And he does say you have to manually install. Like I said, I tried that; it didn't work. So we're not going to do that today. We're just going to keep running with the current release version. All right. What the heck is gamification, Aaron? What is gamification? What are you doing? Why are you rambling? What are you building? It's a good question. Let's go to the Microsoft Learn website because it's a good website that tries to use gamification pretty well. So you can see here, I'm logged in right now with one of my email addresses. I've got many, so this is just a email address that I have not done a lot of stuff on it with. But you can see here, I've got a level and I've got XP. And every time I watch one of these videos, I gain XP. And as I gain XP, I also can learn, I can gain things like achievements, they're called, right? And that usually the achievements are for completing a module. And so if I go through and complete one of these modules, I'll gain an achievement. This is very similar to gamification concepts, right? This is gamification when it comes down to it. They're rewarding me for doing certain things. It's behavior modification when it comes down to it. What we're trying to do is say, hey, if you watch this video, I'm going to give you some XP, and if you get enough XPs, you're going to get a level. You'll level up, and you'll get some either swag or something's going to happen. Like a lot of times, you can go to your profile, you can see there's icons in there that says, Aaron's done all these cool things. He's got these achievements. That's gamification in a nutshell. It's pretty cool, and when you want developers or people just in general to do things, gamification is a very popular way these days of doing it, of getting people to do stuff. It comes from the old school RPGs of the yesterdays. Basically, you gain XP, your character gets more powerful. You've may have played video games that have these concepts. If you've played any kind of role-playing games, like a lot of popular gaming, a lot of popular games turned in almost, they started out not as role-playing games or games that had these elements, but they added them in because they found that it get people, like players, engaged into playing the game more. Like Assassin's Creed, there's like 100, well, not 100, but there's a lot of different currencies you can collect in Assassin's Creed in that game, and those are all gamification concepts of different currencies that you want to track, different point systems based when it comes down to it, right? And the goal is that if you get all the certain types of things, then you get a achievement of some sort. This is popular, and there's even an entire concept frameworks around this. So if you do gamification engine, or actually let's just do gamification framework, and it starts with the O, the most popular right here, Autolasis. This is a very popular framework. Now it's not code. It's a framework. It's a set of concepts. And you basically, it's trying to explain to you, like, when you want to do gamification, these are the things you have to think about. You want to empower people. You want to influence them into doing different things. And it's got all these little different design concepts in this framework that says, if you do these different things, this is the way that you can make, you can modify people and reward them for doing the good things that you want them to do. And there's all kinds of things in this framework that are really good. I think this is a great framework for companies to take a look at. If you were to water this down, though, or not water this down, that's probably a bad term. If we were to take this down and boil it down to how could I code this, though, that's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in this framework per se as a ability to do these. Could I write something generic that could support all these concepts? That's a gamification engine, my friends. And that's something I'm pretty interested in figuring out how we could build one of those things. And so rather than me just doing this by myself for no reason whatsoever, I think we can build this together. So we start out with it saying, what is the most important thing in a gamification engine that we need? Well, that is a user. When it comes down to it, we need some way of tracking a user. Now, one thing to talk about with gamification engines is the concept that a gamification engine is storage, okay, for the status and the progress of somebody. It doesn't do the business logic of what it takes to calculate if they've completed something or not. That's something that's per application, right? If I were to take this and genericize it out so that I can reuse it, because that's a goal of building things, I want to build this in a way that I can reuse it with all my apps, for example. Well, then, if all my apps have different ways of calculating, like when somebody completes something, that logic should be separated from this particular thing. So it can talk to it via API, says, hey, this thing has been updated. but the actual code that figures that out should be, the calculation should be outside of this. So this is in the concept of something we call microservices. If you're kind of used to that term, or maybe if you're not, maybe you're new to this, the microservice concept is I'm going to just do one thing really well. I'm going to store what's going on with the gamification. I'm going to store a user. I'm going to store their points and how well they're doing. I can also store like them compared to other users, so we can build something called a leaderboard, so we can see like who is gaining progress, and we can group people together, and we can have them compete against other groups of people, right? And we can call those guilds, and that's a lot of times in games or in other things are groups of teams of people that are like-minded. Say, for example, a common one that I like to always point out is like the .NET guild versus the Java guild. And maybe you're building this for developers, and so you're trying to promote development content, and you're trying to say, you know, hey, how many .NET developers, you have a hackathon, and maybe they're trying to learn how to do something. And, you know, you can either use .NET and Java, or you could use iOS versus Android, right? You can say, who's going to build, in this hackathon, who's going to build this app that does X? And competing against that and having a leaderboard makes it fun of doing it. And it's friendly. A lot of times in hackathons, you're trying to learn. And so if we build a gamification engine, we could do all kinds of crazy things like this, you know, and have different teams even. Now, we're going to start out with the core basics, right? Because we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about Agile. Agile is a concept of, you know, building software, small little tiny chunks, giving it out to the customer, and let them give feedback and make sure they're cool with it before we go on. What we don't want to do is spend a year and a half writing something and then have them come back and say, this is a turd. I don't want to use this at all because it's not functional. And you go, well, wait a minute. It meets our specification, but our specification didn't meet necessarily what the user expected to see. And this is an old concept that we had called waterfall. We want to get away from that. So we want to do this from an Agile standpoint. So we're going to break this down into small chunks. Today, we're going to try to figure out user profiles. Can we get a simple user up and running? Can we store this information in state somehow? And our state's going to be a database. And make it so that, you know, anytime we want to go get a user, we can. And anytime we want to update the user, we can. And if we want to delete the user, we can. And we can get a list of users if we need to also, right? And we're going to start on a database. The database is going to be Couchbase, and that's a document-based database. Now, what does a document database mean? Well, what that means is we're storing the data inside of a document, and that type of document is called JSON. And it's not the word like the name JSON, J-A-S-O-N. It's J-S-O-N, and it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And so that's how Couchbase stores records in the database. You know, I shouldn't say records, they're documents. And it's a pretty cool thing. The technology idea is that in the old school way of doing things, we had relationship databases where we had to keep child records. Like, you know, we'd have a record and then we'd have something called a foreign key that would allow us to look at like a leaf record or a foreign record. Like, let me give you an example. Maybe you had a user, and then a user is in a department. And the department table is a separate table that we would track all the list of departments. And if I wanted to see all the employees in a certain department, I would have to do something we call join. I would go say, hey, for all the users in the HR department, show me the users' profiles for these. And it could then do that via a query. And that basically means that there's two different tables, we'd call it. There's a user table, and then there's a departments table. That's a primary example of a normal design system. In a document system, we don't necessarily have to set it up that way. We could set it up totally different if we wanted to. We can embed these foreign tables inside of a document so that the documents have all the data and maybe even sub-data inside of them. Now, why would you do that? Well, speed is one reason. To be honest with you, it's just faster. It's also more logical, and that's the second reason. So, once you get used to designing document databases, it's actually can be a lot easier than designing the old relationship databases. Now, you still need to know concepts like indexes, and honestly, getting a data. If you've never taken a data structure course before, like on data structures like lists, binary trees, stacks, queues, those kind of things, you should probably go do that. There's a ton of resources on the YouTube, and a lot of it's free. And I took it a long time ago. I think my first data structure class was in 1994. And I took a re-up in 2004 because I quit college and had to go back a second time. And I went back. They made me retake that class, which it's okay. Data structures are very powerful. Understanding data structures, you don't have to have the knowledge of how to build a database server, but you definitely want to have the knowledge of how to talk to one and store your data in a way that makes sense. And that's where data structures kind of come in. I promise you that if you've never taken a data structure class before, after you take one, you will become a better developer. You just know more internal things about how computer scientists like to think and how things are built. So for me, for example, it's not necessarily important for me to know every single line of code of how Couchbase works. But since I have a background in data structures and computer science, I have a pretty good idea what an index means. And I have a pretty good idea how an index works regardless of what database platform I'm using. So that same knowledge transfers with me if I were to talk about Oracle, SQL Server, Postgres, obviously Couchbase, product I work for, or even some of their competitors like Mongo and etc. Right? All those platforms have different ways of making it so you can find information faster. And most of the time, this is called something called an index. And so having that computer science background of an index means you kind of understand the core concept of how an index works. And that means you can go through and kind of figure out, like, for each platform, then how you want to implement it to best get your data back. So I know I've talked a lot here. We haven't done any coding yet, but I want to kind of give you a background of what the goal is in this next probably several days of videos as we kind of go through and try to build this. So that's, I think, enough backgrounding, and let's just go talk to some databases and some code. So I have Couchbase running on my Mac, and you can run that. You can go to couchbase.com. You can go get a copy if you want. The code will be checked into GitHub today, so you'll be able to download the code actually starting today if you want to. I am running the latest version of Couchbase, which is 7.02. This will require Couchbase 7 or higher because I'm going to use some new features in Couchbase that are not available in prior versions, something called scopes and collections. So in Couchbase, I just basically went through, right-clicked, installed, took all the defaults, and I did this in a previous video. You can also go to the Couchbase website if you're looking for a quick tutorial heads up on how to do that, docs.couchbase.com. They do have a very quick, if I were to go to SDKs, and I go to .NET, they do have a very quick tutorial on how to get you installed and running with Hello World. So if you've never installed before, I do recommend you take a look at that. There's a couple different options. You can run it in Docker, or you can just download it to your Mac and install it. I'm running it on Mac because I've kind of explained this before. I have an M1 Mac Mini, and that's what I'm recording on right now. And the Docker images do not support M1 yet. It's coming in a future release, but right now they don't. So because of that, I could run them in x86 mode, but it's kind of a pain in the butt. So I'm just going to run Couchbase on the regular good old Mac, and it works just fine. In fact, I have the admin web page up here. So I logged in, and I made something called a bucket. And what a bucket is, it's just like a storage spot that you can store documents in. You could think of it like anything. You really could store something in it. You know, a bucket's a bucket, you could store water in it, right? Well, what if we just store data in it instead? That analogy kind of works. So we have a bucket. Now, we can slice up a bucket into smaller things so that we can find things faster. Because if I just throw like 1 million records or 1 million documents into a single bucket, finding the one I'm looking for could be relatively painful from a server standpoint. So we can slice these up into smaller little tiny things. And there's two types of slicing that we can do, something called a scope and then something called a collection. And both of these are just slices, okay? And the maximum that Couchbase supports right now is 1,000. So you can have 1,000 scopes, 1,000 collections in the current 7.0 release, which is more than enough for most people. I'm going to assume maybe there's some really, really big enterprise companies that is out of, you know, they need multiple buckets because that's not enough. But honestly, that's pretty good to get started out with. So when you make a bucket, a default scope comes in called _default. Today, I'm going to just keep that scope the same. However, I'm going to make collections for different types of documents I want to store. So I'm going to start with making a user profile collection. And all my user profiles for all the users that are going to use this system that will ever log in and store data, all that kind of stuff will be stored in that collection. I'll make a separate one that maybe has like quests, things that users can do to gain things like XP. And so we'll have different collections for each of these things as we kind of go through and start taking a look at that. And by doing it, it means that I can get user profiles faster. So, I don't have to go through a million documents to find those user profiles, because I can just say, no, they're over here in this particular collection. And infinitely, that's going to make the thing faster. If you've taken a data structure class, you probably know something called a merge sort. The merge sort is, the concept is if we sort things in a certain way and we go try to find them, we can find them a lot faster. And while this isn't a merge sort, the concept is there of putting things in a certain order so I can find them faster. That's what I'm kind of trying to get at, is that the collection is going to just make it so that there's only certain types of things in this. So if I go over here, it's instantly guaranteed all I have is user profiles. So that's what we're going to do. So we can do that either via code or inside of the UI of the web interface here. I'm just going to click on collections here and go into here to see that we can see that we have a bucket running here. And I'm going to go through and I want to add in a collection. So I'm going to go in and let's see, this is for the database. Let's click scopes and collections here. And you can see here that I've got my default scope. It's called default. I'm going to add a collection in here. I'm going to call this user profiles. I'm going to just leave the max time to live to 0 as the default, and I'm going to take that in, and now I have a collection called that. And if I can go into my scope, and I can see here that I've got two collections. I've got an underscore default, which is the default collection that gets always created. I've got this user profiles collection. We can see how much disk utilization, how much memory it's used, how many documents are in that collection. All these kind of things are pretty cool. So now that I've got this user profile collection, and I know that I've got this underscore default scope, I can go through and I can start talking to my database server via code. Let's go do that. Let's go over to Visual Studio here and take a look here. So I'm going to start Visual Studio 2022. I thought I had it running, but I think I had closed it because of the fact that I was trying to get that RC1 versus 2 thing figured out. So let's see here. I did launch it. It's taking a few seconds to come up. The code I've been working on is something called Gamification. So let's go ahead and open that up. Spinning beach ball. This is running in something called Rosetta 2, and that's the emulation layer, because this is still is Intel based, not ARM based, so it's a little bit slower. And it's also a beta build, which means I've talked about this in the previous stream. They probably have a bunch of symbols, a bunch of things in their debug statements to try to figure out where bugs are. And that's probably going to make the product a little bit slower. All right, so we got Visual Studio 2022 open here. Let's take a look here. We've got, in the previous stream, we went through and we set up something called Cqrs, and that is giving us the ability to make thin controllers. We can make it so that our controller basically only does one thing. It only sends out a request to a request handler, and the request handler will take in that query and then process it and send a result back. By doing this, we can make it so we can run unit tests on each part of this. We can test the controller separate from our handler, and our handler could have our business logic inside of it, for example. And then, of course, we have this request query, and the request query is just what we're sending to the handler to be processed. So that's kind of a review of where we kind of left off last time. We have only one method right now. It's a get method. And right now, if we take a look at it, I believe we have it hard-coded where my good friend John Galloway, some records, what gets returned anytime somebody asks for any record. Regardless of what record they ask for, we always just give them back this particular record. That is not very useful. This gamification engine, I'm just going to have to say, that's not functional, right? This is hard-coded. So we want to get rid of hard-coded. Let's take a look at our user profile real quick here. I do want to make a couple small changes. So in the US, this kind of makes sense, this naming structure, but really, if I were to go into a different country, it's not necessarily as common sense. And so because I'm going to change a couple of these names, I'm going to refactor. So I'm going to use one of these features, and if you're new to development, refactoring gives us the ability to change something, but have it change everywhere in our code without us having to go find and replace it. And that's really important in refactoring. You don't want to have you don't want to just type in a new name there, because you don't know all the references to where that is. If you do that, that's just a pain in the butt to go try to find all of them. So sometimes people will go into edit and find and replace, and they'll try to just find everywhere it is. Most IDEs, and Visual Studio is no different, give you the option to rename. And when you do it here, it's going to rename it in all the different codes. all the different files you have a code to have this. So this is a first name is something that's mostly called a given name in other cultures outside of the current culture I live in, which is the US. And the last name, a lot of times in systems, if you're going to go global, is something called a surname. And so I'm going to use these instead because these are a little bit more generic terms. They're terms that will work in multiple cultures outside of the US. And I don't want to leave anybody behind, honestly. If you're, using the system, I want to be able to have that. Now, later on, we'll add for things like images and icons, and those are the kind of things that profiles usually like. But we're just trying to get like a hello world state up and running of a user profile. And honestly, when we get into things like storing images, we're going to have to get into things like blob storage. And I'll have to eventually get this up and running in something like Azure or Google Cloud or Amazon in order to store those images. So that's going to get into like a way more complicated part of the project than I want to get into today, or even in the first couple sessions where we're just trying to figure out how to get up some very quick functionality. In an MVP world, we're just trying to get the core basics. Can we get something to show people and see whether or not they like it or not? That's our goal. All right. So that's the very first two things. Now, what we should be able to see is that because we refactored that, when we go into our request handler, you'll see here that the variables names have changed on Mac, or these public properties, we call them in C#. So I renamed them over here, and since I used the rename function, I didn't have to do anything more. This should, by theory, work in build. In fact, let's try that. Anytime making a code change, if it's a pretty big one, a lot of times you can build and figure out whether or not it works or not. I like micro changes, which means I like to write some code, validate that it works, and then check it in. You don't want to write code for like 5 hours and then debug and find out it doesn't work, and then try to figure out what code in the last 5 hours you changed has made it not work. That could be a little frustrating and time consuming, to tell you the truth. So my recommendation, if you're new to development, or even if you've been doing it for a while and you haven't thought about micro changes, think about that. Think about, like for me, I like to check in once an hour. That's bare minimum. And if I don't do that, that's not good. Yes. The bug we were having last week, not really a bug, it's just something I have not done yet, is we had that old Weathercast controller. And so whenever the project opens up, it tries to go to that, which doesn't exist. We wanted to have it go to Swagger automatically. After we debug this, let's go fix that. So we're going to go into here. We're going to we need to give it, we need to try it out with Swagger. So we're going to, actually, I'm going to open up a Google, and I'm going to say, I'm looking for a GUID generator. And it's always this website. I like to generate some GUIDs. Let's generate 1,000. And that way I can use these for testing our APIs. Let's grab one here, throw it into our API, and see whether or not it works. We know it ends with 5F. Let's go ahead and execute, see if our API still works. We'll see here we've got our curl, and we got the response back we're looking for. We got John's profile, and honestly, right here's the profile ID, and that's a good profile ID. That's the same one that we cut and pasted in, so that makes logical sense to me. This is still working. Awesome. So we haven't broke our API by renaming that. That's a good sign, right? All right, let's stop. So let's go in and try to fix our very first problem that we see right now, is that I don't want to have to type in, I don't want to have to delete that weather forecast anymore. Well, it turns out that the fix stat is in something called the launcher settings. So we're going to open that real quick here. And this tells it how to launch our website anytime we want to debug. The setting you're looking for is going to be this launch URL. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to delete it and leave it blank. And the same thing for IIS Express. So there's two profiles. IIS Express is for Windows usually, and then the other profile is for .NET Core, which is going to run on something called Kestrel, which is the built-in web server to that. So I'm going to go ahead and fix both those. Oops, I accidentally deleted the wrong thing. I could delete the command name instead of the URL. Let's delete the URL. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And I'm going to try debugging it again real quick, just to make sure that this change doesn't destroy my project. Once again, this just comes down to baby changes, making sure you're not destroying the universe. So if we go here, this should just come up with Swagger automatically now. So look at that. We fixed that very quickly. Now we're getting Swagger for free, which means now we can go in and just throw it in here, do an execute, and magic sauce. We've got our record back. So small, quick wins. Cool. Let's go ahead and stop now. So I do want to do some further refactoring, right? The more I start thinking about this is like, I need a proper structure. So like last week when we were coding, I just wanted to get the user profile outside of the API project. Really, the domain could have a lot more things inside of it. So from an object standpoint, and remember the goal was I wanted to separate those classes out so that if I wrote a Xamarin app, I could basically take that DLL of this down here and bring it in there and be able to serialize and deserialize my objects. So I want to be able to make that shareable between an API project eventually and a mobile project. Now, in this world, once again, I kind of explained that there's this thing called clean architecture, and I give you some places to go look on the internet last week. There's this guy named Uncle Bob that came up with this concept, and he recommends that you break your project up into like 4 different parts. I'm not 100% sold that that's the world's best way to do things, and I'm more happy with this 2-project approach. And there's Code Opinions is a YouTube channel that a person out there has explained like this concept, and I do like it a lot. It makes it a lot easier to manage your code, so I'm going with that for this project. So instead we're gonna have 2, but I want to rename my domain because domain is going to be more of a core project. So I'm gonna rename this. Nope, I don't want to remove it. I want to rename it. So I'm gonna rename. The 2 options are next to each other, so that's easy to get confused. And I'm gonna call this core. Now, when you rename in Visual Studio, the thing to know is your object's namespace, it's called, does not get renamed automatically. Okay? What is namespace? Well, namespace in C# is designed so that 2 classes don't conflict with each other. Let me give you the most core example in the world of what my namespace is so important. In threading in C#, we have something called a task, and that's in the system.threading namespace. What happens if you had a project management system? So you're building your company's name. So I'll just call it Acme, for example. You work for Acme Company. So your namespace is like com.acme.project.task. Well, by having that namespace is saying that my version of a task object is in this particular namespace of my project. It doesn't conflict. That word task in that class name doesn't conflict with the task that comes for threading. And we can just simply tell it, oh, which task, when I reference it, do I want to use? Do I want to use the task that comes in the threading library? Or do I want to use the task that's over in my project management system? That's a core concept of namespace. It makes it so that we can use the same class name in multiple spots in our code, but have it have different meaning. And it's a way of logically breaking down your code and grouping it together in a nutshell. And so because I renamed it, the project, it did not automatically rename my namespace here. So I'm gonna have to go through and do that. So I do not want to do it just by typing a new name there, because remember, if I do that, all my other code won't know about it and it's gonna break. I want to use the built-in IDE functionality rename, because what it's going to do is go find all my code files and change it. And that's the power of why you want to use an IDE. This is the advantage we get. It's really easy. I can just right click and click rename. I'm going to call this core. I'm going to hit a enter key here. And if we go look at our request query, ooh, look at this. So it did not go cross. So that's a bug, because what it should have happened and done when I renamed is it should have went into all the project this references and changed it. But let's take a look here. It did not happen that way. So this, I think this is a bug in Visual Studio's latest beta. It should have been smart enough to do that. It should have been smart enough to know that it's no longer in domain, that it's in core now. So now we have a new problem. Since it didn't fix it, we have to go fix it in all the spots. So let's see what's going on here. Why is it saying, oh, because we haven't built it yet. Let's go ahead and build core. And then we'll have to probably build this also, because the problem is that while we renamed it, we haven't built it. And since this project references, the core project is getting referenced by the API project, until we build it, it won't know about that name change. And so now if we build the API, it should go through and build it and say, wait a minute, I can't find these things. And so we can see here, we've got 5 errors. So let's go ahead and try to fix this and see what's going on here. Oh boy, that ghost window that comes up sometimes when we save. So it doesn't know which core to use. That's going to be the problem here. So you can see that there's so many different things named core that it's not sure where this object is in, and comes down to naming in your namespaces. So this is something I wanted to kind of show off today, that the minute you start changing your namespace, you have to watch out for having collisions, we call it, or other namespaces that have the same name, and so that's a problem, right? And so when I renamed it core, now my problem is that everybody called core, and it doesn't know which one to use. Now the only way I can solve this, there's two ways I can solve this. So one, I could make something called an alias, and I can say core equals, and I can give it the name. So I can do something like this, and I could say gemspace.core, and that's something we call alias. That's one way to solve this problem. Okay. Or the next way I could do it is just by saying I can give it the full domain path, gemspace, if I spell it right, .core. Now, I'm still seeing a problem that it doesn't see core, but I've built it. So now my next question is, when I rename the project, now if I go into my references, is it that the reference has gotten broken? Yeah, see here? See the little red X here? It's because I renamed the project here, and if you look here, it didn't catch the fact that there's a new DLL name. So this, once again, something Visual Studio should be doing for us. This is probably a bug. Now, it's pretty easy to fix. I can just delete the reference, and I can just go into my dependencies, right-click, add project reference, and go back and add this new name, which is gembase.core. When I do that, we should see that now it's picking that up, and hopefully, if I were to do a build, they should be able to see at least this particular one is no longer broken, because that name does actually work. So let's go ahead and do a build. Now, when we build the API project, because we're telling it that we want to reference this project down here, what should happen is this should automatically build this project first and then build my API project. And if you have questions about that, this is how solution files work. Solution files basically list out a list of projects in what order they should be built. And that's something that a product called MS Build does for us. So let's go ahead and build this. And we should see here automatically, we can tell the white squiggly line went away. For at least this particular one that I fixed, it's there and it's fixed. No more white squiggly line, it's good. And I could still go back and use that type alias if I wanted to. I could say core equals gembase.core. And now what I could do is I could take gembase back off. And now what it's going to assume is that if it sees the word core, it's going to replace core with this. Why would I need to do this alias, we call it? It saves typing. That's all it comes down to. So here's some cool features in C# that if you're new to C# you may not know. So I did this on purpose to kind of show off some things here. But now we gotta go fix these other pieces of code that are broken because of that the renaming did not work. Let's go to our errors and take a look at that. So right here, I've got it kind of hid down here. I'm gonna bring it up. And let's bring up our errors. What it should show me is where all the places where my code's broken. I wanna go find these and fix it. So you can see up here, very first problem is the reference. So you can see here, I'm referencing domain instead of core. So I can go through and fix that particular error. And that should go away. Now, if I scroll down, I want to see if I have any other red squiggly lines, errors. I don't see those. Let's go look at the next error. The next error is a very similar thing here. We have the word domain, and we need to replace it with core. So I could do it a couple ways. I could go find all these different ones, or I could just simply find and replace. Now, this is the thing I was just telling you that people do that I don't like to do. But since I'm a little bit lazy here, I'm going to replace the word domain with the word core. And we're going to go through each one and make sure that that's the right one to do, because we don't want to accidentally, just in case we're using the word domain somewhere else, we don't want to have that broken. So I'm going to replace it there, and there's no more place in this file to fix. So we've got 2 fixed. Let's go find the third one that's already fixed. That one's already fixed. Let's go ahead and build again and see if it works. And so we're building the solution right now. I know you can't see it because I've got the window cut off. Let me bring it up a little bit so you can see it. There we are, build successful. The status bar now is down here at the bottom. It used to be kind of up here in the older versions of Visual Studio for the Mac. So they kind of moved your status down to the bottom. So it worked. We built. Now, what did we learn here? We learned that refactoring can sometimes be painful. If we don't watch what we're doing and we do something really big, like refactor our project name, it literally can be pretty darn destructive, to tell you the truth. This is why renaming things like project names is probably not a good idea, especially if you have a large code base, because you have so much code it could possibly break. Now, of course, we're just starting out. We've got like one class and a single controller, so this wasn't all that painful for me to fix. But imagine if you had like 200 classes and you had like 50 controllers. That renaming now exercise is a lot more brittle. The theory is that it could break more things. And so we don't, that's something that's really dangerous. It's something that I would not, when I used to run teams at EY and I was a tech lead, or even other companies I worked at and being a tech lead, I would always be like, whoa, if you want to do that, we can. But you need to understand that's going to cause what we call regression, or bugs that come up that we did not anticipate by making changes. And so we need to have better testing, make sure we have good unit tests. And our QA team goes in, our QE engineers go in and make sure that they test, make sure that just changing this naming doesn't break the entire universe in our product. These are things I've learned throughout the years. These are the type of things that they seem like they make the code easier to read, and they're great qualities of life. But think about it like this. How many end users would even know that we changed that? None. Our end users don't read our code unless they're developers, right? But let's say that the end user that's using this gamification engine, they would never know that that code was changed. So because of that, the value of changing that code versus adding a new feature, like adding the ability to get stickers on your profile if you do a certain achievement, well, the end user knows that. They see that. That's tangible. They can see it, and they want that feature. But sometimes our tech debt is really great for us because it makes the code easier to manage, but it's not something that can be necessarily quantified by the end user. So because of that, a lot of times the business, the people paying for software to be developed, doesn't necessarily like to do that work because they don't see the value. And sometimes you have to just tell them, look, this will make the code cheaper to maintenance in the long run because it's making it more stable. And there's the bigger the code gets, the more likelihood that you're going to have bugs or defects or things that don't work the way you wanted them to work. And so that's these are all part of building software and things that you'll learn throughout your career if you've been doing this. And if you've been doing this a long time, you already know this, and I apologize. But my streams are definitely I do a lot of developer advocacy, so a lot of my developer advocacy is definitely around teaching juniors and mid developers, sharing my knowledge that I've learned throughout the years. And so my streams will have some of that in it. And if you have questions, obviously hit the chat up. I am watching the chat here right now, so feel free to say anything. I think I can send messages out. Hello, everyone. And they, by theory, should show up in chat. All right, let's see here. So we've got our user profile renamed. So we're pretty good here, but we would like to have some more options. So one, we've got it over to core. I want to do some further refactoring. So I can make myself, I know in the future I'm going to need more types of things, and I want to be able to organize my objects in a way that I can find them quickly. That's when we build folders. If you think about it, like, why do we have folders in our code and stuff? It's, well, so we can find things quickly. If you think about it, I'm going to have these things called domain objects. And I talked about that last stream. And so I do want to build domain objects. And so I'm going to right click and say I want to make a new folder. And that one is a domain object. So I'm going to go ahead and make a domain object folder. I'm going to move my user profile into that folder. Should be able to just drag and drop it in Visual Studio for the Mac. We'll see if this functionality works. And it looks like it did work. Now, I know for a fact, because we talked about this last session, it does not automatically rename, so it didn't refactor. So what we need to do is do that. So we're going to do a rename and see if this fixes it. We're going to call it core.domain. Oop. Okay, maybe the editor will catch up with me. Domain. Oh, look at that. So here's another bug. When I rename, it doesn't let me use the period. I'm hitting the period and nothing happens. I would assume that if I want to rename this, I could also add in another namespace, like another folder into it, for example. It's not allowing that right now. So I'm going to hit escape because that's not working. So a couple different things. I'll have to slice this video apart and maybe share with Jordan over at Microsoft on some things I'm seeing here. We'll just call it domain object. You're going to go back and say, well, Aaron, you just refactored this once. Now you have to refactor it again. Yes. I mean, that's how the cookie crumbles sometimes, folks. Well, but we know where to fix it. We know that's really only two files. We know over here, and we also know it's in the other file. So domain object And then the problem is I won't be able to find that, so I need to do gemsbase.core up here, and then it should be domain objects, I think, right? Not domain object. That should hopefully be able to find that. Now, we did change it, but the problem is that we do have to do a build for it to find it. So first, let's go ahead and just see if we can replace these references to it. And I have to remember from last time where we found these. And then the other was not in a query. Oh, it is in a query. And the last place is the controller, I want to say. Are we returning? Oh, we're using an action, so we don't need it in the controller. So let's go ahead and build and see if this fixes it. And this should hopefully be the last folder refactoring we have to do for a while here. So we got 3 errors. Let's go find our errors here. Turn our warnings off, turn our errors on. And it says it can't find domain object. Domain object equals. See if it finds it now. It finds it now. So our alias we just had to update over here. Now let's go into our handler. And it's still confused on domain object. Let's just add it here and see if it fixes it. Let it do a build and see if that fixes it. By theory, both should work. Actually, if anything, we shouldn't need a domain object here anymore because we are referencing it. It should be able to find user profile without needing any... Oh, no, it can't because this user profile also has it. So it'd have to be domain object. See where so this is another example of why our namespacing could come into conflict. See here we have user profile here in our namespace, but we also have it down here because technically speaking it's the object name. These are conflicts in the namespace, and so this is where you can have problems. So we're going to have to use the syntax we used in request query to make something we call alias to fix this. So we're going to go into here, we're going to delete this, just say that domain object equals this. And now anytime it sees domain object, it should know that. And this should hopefully fix the rest of our compiler errors. Now, you could, of course, completely not have this problem by just changing the way you name things. You know, and that's obviously, you know, if you find a name and it's conflicting, you just change the name to something else. However, there is a relationship between user profile here and the user profile, the object down there. And so I don't want to lose those naming conventions because I want to have them be the same on purpose. I'm basically making this on purpose because I want to be able to say, oh, if I go to the user profile here, this feature, it uses this domain object. I want to be able to have that correlation. And I want to be able to know that if I change this user profile object, and if I go into the features for user profile, I can find all the features that I'd have to go through and change anytime I change that object. I want to have that mapping. That's why I've made the structure like this, so that logically I can go in, and as I build more controllers, I build more features, and I change something, that's going to happen. I want to be able to control where I have to go and fix it. That's the goal of this. So that's what we're kind of doing here. And that's the reason why the structure is working the way it's working, so just so you know. So we should build again. And so in the last hour, all we've really done, unfortunately, or last half hour, all we've done is done some very simple refactoring. And the refactoring was to get our point so that we understand in Visual Studio how to do refactoring, understand what namespace was, and those kind of things. I'm going to go through and debug this. So let's go ahead and hit the debug button. It's going to go ahead and do a build. And I just want to make sure my profiles work the same way that they did before. Once again, I told you I like these micro changes. I like to do small things, test it, make sure I didn't break things. Now, of course, once we get to unit tests, which we're going to get to pretty quickly here, we can just have our unit tests run. And I won't have to do this web page anymore. This is what happens when you don't have unit tests. When you don't have unit tests, you have to open Swagger, you have to run stuff, you have to check it. That's what you should be doing before you do a code check-in. With unit tests, you can just run your unit tests and have your unit tests. Have the computer do this work for you. Have it automatically call that API, have it automatically put in some dummy data, and automatically make sure that it comes back with the results you're expecting. And by doing that, that means every single time that you make code change, you can just run your unit tests in Magic Sauce. You know whether or not your code broke it or not. And of course, unit tests aren't foolproof. They're not 100%. No matter what anybody tells you, there's always going to be little tiny glitches because unit tests are also code. And anytime you change your code, you may have to update your unit tests, and there could be a bug in the unit test, right? So the unit test is never 100% guaranteed to give you the end all, yes, your code is stable, but it's a good stopgate, and it's way better than just guessing, to say the least. So people code, make unit tests. That's what Aaron's trying to tell you. All right, let's go through and start talking about what a base class is and why we may want one of these. So inside of the domain object, we have a lot of different objects we're going to want to create in the long term. We knew that from over on the Microsoft website, we had this thing called XP. So that's some kind of like point system we want to track. We're going to want to be able to track like things like goals that they can achieve. We're going to call those quests. We have all these kind of different objects. However, most of the time in some systems, you're going to have a certain amount of properties. Then no matter what you're storing, what kind of document or object you're storing, you want the same fields. And you want these for security and login reasons. And so because of that, we're going to make a base class that we're going to say any object we create will inherit from this, and they're going to get some free functionality in it. And so what a base class is usually something called an abstract class, a class that cannot be created, but has some free methods or properties on it. And if you're not if you're coming from different languages, methods may be called functions. They're kind of the same thing. We're going to go through and make a new class. We're going to call it base, domain base. And we're going to say that this is our domain base class. We're going to call it an abstract class. And any class that gets created is going to inherit from this moving forward, which means that it's going to be the parent of all of our domain objects. And because of that, it's going to get any public things for free. Any public properties, any public methods we put on this, all the classes that inherit from it get that functionality. Now, this is one way of doing it. There's another way that's usually better called an interface. And we can get into some interfacing a little bit later. But for this, there's like a lot of purists that say you should never have abstract classes. Everything should just be interfaces. I don't 100% agree with that. If you're doing a lot of typing, I think there's a reason why both these fit in. In this particular example, there's no doubt that this is going to cause less typing, less bugs, and it's a pretty simple concept. I'm only talking about 4 fields here. So what am I going to track here? That's a good question. I'm going to track in the person that created the document, the person that updated the document, the created date of the document, and the last updated date. Now, I only care about the last, so we're going to call that modified. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our first field, and I showed you this last time, but I'm going to show you again a shortcut. Type the word prop in and hit tab. It automatically make a public property for you. You have to hit tab twice on that. So I'm going to store it as a string, and I'm going to say created by. This is going to store who created the document in my system, okay? Now, I'd also like to store who modified the document. So I'm going to say prop again, tab twice, string. I'm going to say modified by, tab again, modified by. And now we have 2 fields that are pretty cool that we can use. We also want to track the time and date that it happened. And this is, I can't tell you how many times in systems I've had people ask me, where's the logs to see when somebody did something? That tends to be important. So we'll also do that. We'll say public date time. We're going to say created on get and set. Now that time I typed it out. To show you can type it out. It depends on what you want to do, but I still believe that the prop is a faster way to build this. I just have to remember to hit tab. So there's my 4 fields. I've got created by, modified by. This will be the email address of the user that logs in that we can then go through and find this kind of information on. And then, of course, the date created and modified on. So now all I have to do is go into my user profile and be able to go in and add that inheritance. And how we do inheritance in C# at least is we just make a colon and we just type in the class name. So I'm just going to call this domain base. That's it. This instantly will now have those properties, we call those public properties, available to be used. And we can test this. We can go into our query, not our query, excuse me, our handler, and we can add in those fields. So we're going to say that this record, so let's see here, user profile. So let's go ahead and say created by, see that the field is instantly available. And I'm going to be cheat. I'm just going to copy this and paste it. And then created on equals date time now. And modified on will also mean the same thing, date time now. And we're pretty close to having this done, and we'll have this new API with these new fields. Let's go ahead and say that this is going to be what's like build.gates. Why not? Bill created John's record. Got to be able to spell right today. All right. That's pretty cool. So we now have a user profile. We went through, had some new fields, add something called an abstract class. Let's go ahead and run our API again now and see if it works. And if that works, then we can start taking a look at how do we store these documents so that we can make documents, store them in a database, and get them back. That seems like it'd be something fun to do. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. We're going to go ahead and borrow a GUID from here. Let's go ahead and execute. We can see here we've got a given name, surname, email, created, and modified. All those things are working now. That's pretty cool. So we've kind of got this to the point where it works. We refactored it, but it doesn't talk to a database. So the state is lost, and it's not really useful at all. So let's start doing the hard part. Let's start figuring out how to make it work with a database. So in order to do that, we're probably going to need to build some new stuff that we don't have right now inside of the app. And so the very first pattern I want to build is I'm going to add in a new folder in our API. I'm going to call this services. There's a new folder. I'm going to make an interface. We talked about this earlier. And so interfaces are this other concept of building things where we can do something called contract. And so I'm going to have something called a Couchbase service. Couchbase service will go through and bring certain things about Couchbase back to us that we can use inside of our repositories. Repositories where you can go and get certain sets of information. So I'm going to make two classes right off the bat because I'm not going to want these, and I'm going to make the first one, call it Couchbase service, and we're going to make another one called mock. We'll call it mock. And what the mock will do is mock will allow us to do unit tests against it with the mock. Now for both of these, ooh, look at this. We've got some kind of UI glitch where I don't know what the heck that is there, but some kind of space that should not be there. That's also another thing I'll have to point out to Jordan. That seems pretty weird. Should not make an extra space there for no reason. Let's go ahead and grab our interface here. We're going to make inheritance instantly to both these. By doing that, we'll keep ourselves honest that anytime we... I didn't need the full line. I just need the interface name. Being lazy trying to cut and paste it in. We want to keep ourselves honest. Anytime we change the contract that's in our interface, we want to make sure we go and update our code. That's a good thing to be honest about. Right now, our interface is empty, so these should not complain. In fact, if we were to build, they would just work because of the fact that we really have added an interface of nothing. So the value coming back from it is very small. Now, you're probably saying, well, then how do we talk to Couchbase? Well, we need a NuGet package, and I don't remember if I added it or not, so let's go check. So we don't have it. So we're going to add a new framework in via a NuGet package. Let's go take a look here. I don't have it. So let's go ahead and manage NuGet packages, and we're going to add in something called Couchbase. Just go search for Couchbase. Add in a couple different NuGet packages. So one, I definitely want the .NET client Now they do have something called the Dependency Injection framework, and this is something that I do like a lot. This automatically will inject in the framework for me, so it kind of takes care of registering Couchbase and stuff. It's like a wrapper around the SDK in some sense, and then we also have a link to Couchbase. Now, if I remember right, this will automatically bring in the Couchbase client, but the one problem I have with this, if we take a look here, it's only bringing in .NET Client 3.2.0, so it hasn't been updated to 3.2.3, which is the latest version of the SDK. So that's going to be a problem for us. So we're probably not going to be able to use that, which is a bummer. I wonder, I should talk to the SDK team about that. Obviously, we should have this updated. I'm not sure why it hasn't. In fact, it was updated on 7.29. This is updated on 10.6. Yeah. All right. Well, that's a note from me. That's on our end at Couchbase. I'll have to talk to the development team and see why we haven't updated this yet, and see if we can get it updated. The link for Couchbase is based on really old version of Couchbase .NET. So it's saying it's compatible with newer versions. Let's go with the core basic right now of just using Couchbase, and then I'm probably going to refactor this out to use this. I'm going to have to figure out what's going on with a couple of these libraries. I believe this. I know Matt, the person that is one of the people that's worked on this. I believe what we can do with this is I can bring in source and compile the source as a project and get it so that it compiles against the latest version of .NET. And that way it's using the latest SDK, and I think that's going to be fine. I am a little bit concerned about using this old version, though, because of the fact that it may not have supports for scopes and collections. So I'm not really sure if that's in there yet, so I don't want to use that right now. So right for today, I'm just going to use the .NET-based client. We'll go through the documentation of how to just use the core basics with it, and then we'll take a look at maybe next session of refactoring it out once we get some information from that team. So inside of the Couchbase service, boy, that's really bugging me that this thing is broken. Let's go ahead and try to build now and see if it works. Oh wait, still adding our NuGet packages. 1 second here. We can go into the package console, see what's going on. You see here the package console is going in and making sure that it's compatible with everything. Package console is what does the NuGet packages, and these are similar to like npm. If you're using Node, or if you're using Maven and Java and Kotlin, or Swift Package Manager if you're using Swift, or CocoaPods if you're using Swift, same concept, packages. All right. So it looks like it's installed without problems. So we're going to need to be able to pass in some configuration to the Couchbase service. Okay, and once it does that, then we're going to be able to get stuff from it. So I'm going to make an object over here. Now, it's not really a domain object. It's not going to be functionality in our app per se, right? So this is more of basically an app that or a class we're only going to use for talking to the service. So I'm going to add it in the service folder, and that way it's all combined together. And so this is going to be called the Couchbase config. And just to get started today, we only need a couple small pieces of information to get ourselves talking to Couchbase. Wait for this to add real quick. I wonder if that folder, that ghost item there, is causing this lockup. Because if we take a look here, we have the spinning beach ball of death for some reason. And I'm not sure why, but I'm pretty sure it's because that ghost item that lives over there in the tree is not supposed to be there. And so when I added this new file, it's like freaking out. Let me see if I can bring the Finder up and see if it's locked up. It is locked up. Man, oh man. Well, that is another bummer. Visual Studio for Mac is locked up. This is a beta. That's perfectly okay. We're going to do the three-finger salute, the Alt-Control-Delete, the force quit, and that should kill it. And let's go ahead and restart. We'll file a quick bug report, and we'll get ourselves back up to writing code. We probably lost that file, but it's not a big deal. It's just a new file. Let's see if it comes up. There we go. Got it back open. Let's head and go to Gem's base. and wait for the spinning beach ball of death to go away and see whether or not our folder's fixed. Now, if our folder's not fixed, I can show you how to edit the project file to fix it. All the files in there are usually in the project file. So let's see here now. If we go into services, there we go. So now we have all 4 classes. So it looks like I think what happened was that UI hung it up. So let's just real quick here report a problem. Put a new problem. UI lockup when creating new file and folder has a ghost item. Created a new interface. The file when create. You know what? I'm gonna fill this out afterward because there's no fun watching Aaron fill out a bug report to Microsoft on the stream. So let me go ahead and just close that. We'll fill it out afterward. Instead, let's get back to writing some code here. So I was saying before we locked up real quick here, what we're looking for is a. Oh, please don't lock up on me again. We'll go back to, if we get one more lockup, we'll go back to 2019. Because I don't want to waste time. You guys watching me here have the thing blow up. I do want to, I want to play with this, but I also want to get some code done. And man, I'm not sure what's going on with this thing. Looks like it's locking up again. It is locking up again. Oh boy. Oh, let me close Zoom. I don't need Zoom open. It just died on me. I didn't even force quit it this time. I'll give it one more try on the stream here. If it dies again, we're going to revert back to 2019 and write some code real quick. See if we can get something out the door. Here we go. Now we've got to send the report to Apple. Hopefully then they should get it as part of the developer profile. They should be able to see all the crash reports. Let's go back to Gembase, see if we can get it open again, see if we can make some code changes without it crashing. Waiting for it. It is beta, like I said, and I know that they're not planning on releasing this until sometime next year, so we are playing with early hot bits right now. This is only the second preview, and they are making some pretty big changes underneath the hood. So anytime you make big changes under the hood, it's not good. Let's go into services and see whether or not we can now modify this object that we created. So I'm going to delete these. Oh, editor's working again, so here we go. So we're going to do a prop string, and we're going to make this cluster, tab again, cluster URL. We'll make another property. We'll call it prop string username, and another prop, another string password. And this is how we're going to talk to the cluster. The cluster, even though you have one server in Couchbase, it's still a cluster, just a cluster of one. Couchbase is infinitely scalable, so you can have multiple servers in your cluster if you like, and that's one of the coolest things about it. And there's not a lot of work to get that up and running. You can go into the admin interface and just add more nodes, and it just kind of scales. There are some settings as an architect you'd want to talk about, like, how many queries you want versus data services, and we have separate services that run things like indexing and full text search and those kind of things and analytics. So but it's a very flexible product. For today, for just learning and getting started, even though I only have one server, which is running on my Mac, I'm still going to have to talk to it via something we call the cluster URL. So I'm going to get this information from my config file. And then once I have it from, well, I'll hard code it in to start out with, and then I'll change over the config file. How's that sound? Well, slowly build up our feature and see if we can get it working. So we have these 3 things, and this is what we need in order to talk to the database. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. And let's go ahead and go into the Couchbase server, our service. We're going to need to open the interface, the service in the mock because we're going to make changes to the interface. We're going to say that we're going to allow a async. So we're going to need an async method. Asynchronous code just runs asynchronously. We're going to make something called a task, and we're going to say that we want to have an init method init cluster. This is going to initialize our service so that it can talk to the cluster. And it's going to take in something called a Couchbase config. I'll call this, let's see, Couchbase config. We'll take the recommendation from it. And so now the problem is that the minute we put this method in, our other two services are going to bust because of the fact that they don't have that method inside of them. Okay. So you can see here what we need to do is we need to go into both these and put this method in. Now there's two ways to do this. Let me go back. I cut and pasted it, but that's actually not the best recommendation. Let me take this line out also. Let me show you some more cool features of Visual Studio for the Mac. I can right click on the interface and say there's actions and refactoring. One of the things is you could just tell it to do is implement the interface. And so what it's going to do is just go in and find the methods that you added to the interface and just automatically grab them in. Now you can see here it added a line of code that makes it so that the code will still compile. That's kind of cool. Now, of course, if you hit this method, it's going to throw an exception that it's not implemented yet, and that's going to tell you where in your code you need to go fix it. So if you have a thought in mind, you're coding, you got this idea, and you don't want to lose that idea, but you need some kind of implementation before you can go on with it, you can literally make, I call this a stub. You can make a stub method, say, hey, I want to add this new method in, but not even implement it. Just move on. Just call that method and make the assumption later on, you'll go fix it. And then continue writing your idea down. And then when you go backwards, you compile, you can go find, oh, I forgot to go implement that. Let me go implement that little tiny part now. I trust myself to know enough that if I say I need to make a method, I put the name in and I put what I think the parameters should be, I can make the assumption I know how to make that method eventually work. So I can just leave it blank for right now and just move on and fix it later. It's a very common thing I do when I code. It keeps me in the mind of what I'm trying to get accomplished at the time. And it guarantees that, I'm not losing myself over the little tiny details. So we can see here that we have the init method. We're going to init it. We're going to go through and implement it now. So to init the cluster, we're going to take the config in. We're going to need to store the cluster connection. We definitely want to make a private variable that we can store that. And that's, we're going to go up here. We're going to make something called we're going to do a using statement, call it Couchbase. Because we want to use the Couchbase namespace and the objects that are inside of that. One of them is called the Couchbase cluster. Or is it iCluster? There it is, iCluster. We're going to call this _cluster because for local references, we almost always call this cluster. Now you're going to say, well, shouldn't you make that read-only? Well, the problem is read-only can only be implemented in the constructor. But the problem is that the iCluster method that we're going to use to call the cluster, the initialize this, that's an async method. And so you can't make your constructor async. And you could do some hacky things like do a task that run in there and stuff. We're not doing hacky things today. So we're going to do it this way for right now. Honestly, the better way to do this is to get the dependency injector working because that kind of does a bunch of this stuff for you as part of that framework. So when .NET starts up, it can automatically inject it and get those things up and running. I've used it before. It's pretty great. So I recommend that, but the problem is it's not updated to the latest version of the SDK, and I want the latest version of the SDK. So that's something I'm going to have to talk to the dev team about to figure out, the SDK dev team to figure out why it's not updated. I'm sure it's just something that someone forgot to do a build on it. Let's see here. Oh, so we're going to build a cluster. So we're going to say cluster here. Well, first we could, yeah. Try and think here. Is this what we want to? This is how we want to do it. Yeah, let's do it here. Let's just say cluster equals new Couchbase. Why are we not getting not getting a telesense up right now either, which is super frustrating. Where's our docs? just called cluster. There should be a method called connect async. And this should take in the three things that we have in our config. It should take in, I don't know why IntelliSense broke again. Yeah. Beta, Couchbase, config dot. There we go. Well, we're getting something back here. It's not telling me what I need, but it's telling me I need something. I do know that's username and password, so we're gonna say Couchbase, config dot username and Couchbase config dot password. What would be nice is if the IntelliSense told me this is the property that you're trying to fill out. What do you need? I think there's a new keyword in .NET 9 called the with statement that you also can use. And I think it'll allow you to name your parameters kind of like Kotlin. Pretty sure that exists. I'm not sure. We can look up the syntax. I'm not sure if it works with just any constructor or not, but I'm interested in that. Let's go find out what's going on with that. C# 9 constructor with. Let's see whether or not that's working. New to C# guide. We're looking for, and I've read this before, so I kind of know this. Let's see if we can find the with statement. So this is records. Records are really cool. They're like data classes inside of Kotlin. Let's go take a look at non-constructor mutation. That's not what I want. I want this is the syntax I'm used to using, but I thought that there was a new one that was with. Pattern match is pretty cool. Is within C# 8. Now I'm just forgetting what version it came in. Let's see here. Read-only members. Nope. That's a new switch statement, which is pretty cool. All right, well, let's just go back to our code and use the, see if we can use the squiggly bracket way of doing it. Where's our code at? Starting here. This is mad because it needs to be an async, so it needs to be a wait, and this needs to be async. And that should hopefully fix that. And what's it mad about here now? Why is that mad? I don't think the ID is cut up yet. I know for a fact, I'm looking at the documentation. It says that that is the method name. Oh, not new. Duh, that's what's going on because it's a method call. That's a static class. Cluster designs include another potential thing. Oh, I'm missing it's async. It's not sync. Good lord, Aaron, learn how to type today. That's why you get used to IntelliSense, and it kills you every time, right? You're waiting for the period to type the name in, and if the period doesn't show up, then you're a little confused. I can't tell you how many times I've done the cluster dot and look to see what the references are. Of course, now IntelliSense is working. It wasn't working a couple of minutes ago, but all right. There is another way to do this, though. I do believe you could pass it in with the squiggly bracket if you're using the new keyword, but we're not using the new keyword. We're calling a method. So because of that, I do not think we could do that. Let's go ahead and just build to make sure I haven't broken any other syntax real quick. I do see a weird squiggly line here, but I think that's just because of the space. I don't think it's a bug. I just think the ID is telling us stuff that's wrong. Oh, and I don't have the ID up high enough for you to see that the build status is going on here. Let me see here. There it goes. You can see here it's building the debug build for it. And that seems like it worked. So you can see here that we have, so it's mad because it says that that's not nullable, and in the constructor we don't create it. You can solve this by doing, you could make it nullable like that, and then say it's equal to null. And then init over here, and then each one, this should get rid of that error. They're also complaining because of the fact that the user object doesn't have a default value. You know, inside the constructor, you could do something like this and try to get rid of that to give it a default value. It's actually a terrible way to do it in C#, to tell you the truth. I prefer string empty, but I guess there's ways we can get rid of that error. But or I guess we could also use a record if we needed to, the new data type. So that's really what these are. They're not. The other problem with records, you only can change it once. Once you set it, it's non-mutable. And I'm not 100% convinced that that is the thing I want. So we're not going to use record right now. And let's see here. Non-null properties must contain a non-null value when X in the constructor. Consider declaring a property as nullable. I'm not doing that. This is pretty stupid that I'm going to do this, but and we never use lowercase string because I hate the color teal. It's been well documented. And you can do something like this, give a name. I really wish it would not default to uppercase string. That's annoying as hell. Why is it recommending that? That's really interesting. String a question mark? I don't think that's right either. Email equals string.empty. I'm not a fan of warnings, to tell you the truth. And so anytime the compiler comes up with warnings when I build, those are usually just things that end up compiling over a period of time, and before you know it, you have 60 of them, and then you can't figure out which warnings are important versus not. So that's why I took some time out of my way to say, can I just make this warning go away by adding a small amount of code and make it so that when I look at my build output, I can make sure that the build output that's coming through isn't telling me something that is wrong, versus something that, something that I've literally done that the warning is valuable versus not. So I still have 5 warnings. Non-nullable property must contain null. Oh, it's because the well, this is because created by and modified by are also part of the base class. So I need to add those in too. So I'd have to say created by equals string.empty. Man, that is super annoying that it does that. It automatically defaults to the capital string. Don't do that. Man. If I type in lowercase string, keep the lowercase string. I know that they're aliases to each other and that they're both the same thing, but that's just annoying. So that should get rid of those two. And then it's mad because of the connect, the config. It's mad because that class also has the same problem. I haven't done C# enough to know in a while to know why this is happening, what the new fix is for it, other than make these nullable, which I do not want to do. Username equals password. It's actually, I probably should make these nullable. It's a lot of checks we have to do then, though. It is the proper syntax. Should I make these nullable? You know what? I'm changing my mind on this, folks. Let's use the new feature and figure out how it works. Let's not do old school ways of doing things to try to make the warnings go away. So what are nullables? Nullables are the ability to basically put a question mark to say that this is optionally null. And you'll have to then kind of do a check and get it out of being null. And there's a syntax for that in the C# language. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to get rid of all these, and we're just going to do it that way. We'll make these nullable because of the fact that they could be null for some reason, and we probably want our code to be stable enough where they are null that we do something about that. And then we need to make these two nullable also. That should actually make this happier. And this is the way I'd write Kotlin in Swift, so I should not be backing my old, prior to nullables experience inside of C#. So now we have 3 warnings. Let's go find out what our warnings are and see if we can kill those. What are the warnings? We have it where possible null referencing connection string and task. And usually a password, yes. By the way, you can filter them also on this screen instead. This is a little bit easier to read than going to the build output. I'm used to reading a lot of build output, to tell you the truth. So I'm used to doing it there, but this is the better way of doing it, because this will take you exactly to the code where the problem is. So we have a problem now that the Couchbase config, these things could be null, and we're passing those in when they could be null. So we want to say if, so we're gonna have to make a big statement here. We're gonna say if var, I think you have to use the var keyword. We're about to find out here. Why is it saying? Is it just name? Let's just try this. Cluster URL as, I think the syntax is string equals Couchbase config. I remember when I looked this up, it was very wordy compared to Kotlin, where the Kotlin just has the is this it? I think you need the var keyword. Is this the keyword? How do you do nullables in 9? C# 9. Let's look up the syntax for it. I think it's an 8. Yeah, nullable if as. And so here's the nullable, and it says a is int. So you give it the data type. So a is int, and then the thing that you want to get the value from. That's the syntax. Okay. Well, the important thing is not knowing, have to remember every piece of syntax, just knowing that it exists and be able to find it quickly. So that instead it's the variable name as string, and then the place that you get it from. That's what that article said. And then I should be able to do this. That should work. I don't know why. So why? That's what it said. A is here. Oh. I have it backwards. I literally, so it's a, so it's the value you're getting is string, and then the new value you want to take it to. Oh boy. So I got that backwards. We want to say this. We want to say if Couchbase cluster. Boy, that did also not work out the way I want it to. If as string, no, that's also not what we want. It's Couchbase config cluster URL as string cluster URL. That syntax should work according to the C# documentation here. As int, so we're saying the value that we have that's a nullable as the type, and then the new name that you want to give it that would be unboxed or basically typecasted to be the actual variable name you want to use. What? Cannot implicitly move a bool. Wait, what? It is a type of string. Is there a different syntax for a string? They have a lot of integers here. So they're saying here, that syntax still looks right. Why is it saying that it's a bool? I wonder if I have to tell it to use the new language, the nullables, and use the new language type. I remember there was one point in time where you had to go into the config for the project and do it. Problem is that if I do the if check, I still need to typecast it back out, that's what I'm trying to do here. I don't want to do that. All I want, wow, .NET, come on. Oh. Well, that's pretty cool. Well, look at this. They have a new syntax they say here that just says if B has value. Well, geez, that looks like it's even easier. Can we just say this? Has. See, that doesn't show up. Couchbase config is not null, but for some reason the properties inside of it is null. So what's its recommendation here? Because I've tried a couple different that's not helping. I've tried 2 of these different syntaxes. Neither one of these syntaxes work. If A is int and A is nullable, I think what ends up happening is there's a property in the chproj called I do believe it's this. I believe that there used to be a thing where you had to tell it in a chproj that you have to do it. But this is C#8, literally. This should be enabled by default in these projects. Look in here to see. Oh, they're using the exclamation point. This is what I was looking for. This is what I was looking for. I think this is what's going on here. Let's go ahead and try this. Should be edit project file. It's enabled. Look at nullable enabled with .NET 6. And so why the syntax is not working, I do not know. Well, according to this, what I should be able to say is if not string is null or empty. I know this works. This is a terrible crap storm of bad logic, right? I could then say, according to this, actually it looks like the compiler no longer complains. The warning no longer complains if you check. All right, well, let's make this so we can see the code better. So one thing we could do is say, oh, now I'm used to other language syntax for this, string dot is null or empty, and I could say Couchbase config dot username, and I can say and if not string dot is null or empty on Couchbase config dot password. Oop, and I have an extra set of things there. This should pass all of our checks and say now these 3 should go away. cleaning out the warnings. Build successful. Let's see how many warnings we got. Errors. 0 warnings, 0 errors. Oh, look at that. That was way more work than it should have been. But our code is a little bit more stable because we're saying, hey, only do this if these things are there. And technically speaking, now we have a newer problem, though, that this thing could be null still. So we'll have to do a null check when we use it in the future to make sure it's not null. Otherwise, we'll have to throw some kind of exception, right? Actually, we could do that here. We could say if else throw no exception. No, what kind of? I'm just looking for a null. Looking for the standard null. Error. Cluster URL, username and password must not be null. There we go. We'll throw them a exception. Throw new. Using too many languages and forgetting that some of them require the word new and some of them don't. There we go. So look at that. It took us all this time, but we've got a pretty stable init cluster method up and running here. I'm using the new C# nullables, the no warnings. We're going to check if it's not null first. I think there's probably a better way to do this. I need to look up that syntax for next time. But by theory, we should be able to init the cluster it needs now. So then the next thing we need to figure out is, I think we'll probably call it a day here. I know it's a 4:43. We need to be able to get a couple things back. We need to be able to get a bucket, collection, and scope. And so we're going to make a new tuple. So we'll say it's a task, but it's going to return something called a tuple. And that's going to return a type of iBucket, iScope, and iCollection. And we're going to call that get bucket scope collection. And we'll say string question. Well, bucket cannot be null. And we'll make the rest of these nullable. String, we'll say scope. Actually, we'll say scope equals, we'll give it a default value of default, underscore default. And we'll say string collection also equals default. So if they don't send us one of those two values, we'll take the defaults. That's how we're going to code this up. I'm going to put these on separate lines so this is a little bit easier to read. Oop, this is interface. We don't care about that at all. We don't care about implementations and interfaces. iCollections. Oh, Couchbase. What is the syntax? It is a collection. These are in SDK2. Scope is there. Why is it saying collection is not? Look it up in the API reference. We'll click here. I was pretty sure that those are something called an iCollection. Of course, it's going to conflict with the generics collection namespace. See the Microsoft one? So you can see that that's the issue here at hand. That Microsoft also has something called a collection. Can I do Couchbase dot weird that. Why do we have key value? We also don't need Couchbase key value. Let's try. Huh. So it's saying that iScope is in key value. I did not realize that. Couchbase. Okay. We need collection. I don't see iCollection anywhere in here. What namespace is iCollection in then? I know that there's an interface for collections, but the IntelliSense is probably not going to help me on this. Well, crud. Let's see here. Let's go see if we can get the Couchbase documentation open and get to the API documentation. So I've got it open over here. Let's take a look at it. Project docs. Actually, we should be able to get the API docs. Where is the link to... Here's the API references. Great. Let's go to API reference from here. Here we go. All right, so let's see. We are looking for iCollection. iCluster. It's not in here. What's in bucket? It's not in there. It's not in there. Not in there. Well, this is where I know iScope was. So let's take a look and see what we got here. I look up, let's see, binary collection, Couchbase collection. It's called a Couchbase collection. Oh, that explains it. That was smart of them, though, right? To make it so it doesn't conflict with the built-in .NET one. So that's the namespace different. And so that should get us the iCouchbase collection. There we go. And that's going to be our interface definition. We're going to take this. And we'll implement this over in our other two services. And I think we'll call it a day then. So let's go into here. We're going to right click and say implement that. That looks pretty good. Wait, what did it? Oh, no. It should be implementing it. Let's go back down here. Right click and say implement. Quick actions and refactoring. Boy. Sometimes that ghost window really is painful. So I just told it to implement and it didn't implement it. Oh, there it goes. There it is. And so we can do the same thing to save ourselves some time over in the mock, because the mock's going to do the same thing. Otherwise, we can't build. And we know that we'll have to add the using statements in here. Using Couchbase. And we need to use Couchbase key value. And that should solve those three things. Okay, that should fix mocks. So let's go back here, and we have now this, and we need to go through and get this all set up. So if to start out with, let's make this async. And let's take a look here. So in our code, what we're going to say is if first we need to make sure that our Couchbase cluster is not null. If cluster equals null, else, and then we'll throw throw new exception, no reference exception, cluster is null, please run init cluster method first. So we'll give the developer a good idea what needs to happen. If they're getting this, we're saying, hey, look, if the cluster is null, we're going to throw this and say, that's the reason why there. Else, we're going to say, to start out with, we're going to go var cluster equals, or var bucket equals, because we want a bucket, we're going to say cluster, await, cluster dot bucket. Man, this is really frustrating when the IntelliSense does not work like all the time. Like, man, I don't know what to say. I know for a fact that cluster exists. It's right here. We've checked it's not null, but yet for some reason Roslyn and the compiler is just not coming up. There it is. It's called bucket async, I think. Yep, there it is. And we're going to give it the bucket name. Okay. So that will give us, what else does it need? Oh, they're named the same thing. Oh, good Lord. That's a good point. We'll say, gotta name it something other than bucket. We'll call these bucket name. We'll rename these name. Let's not do that. What? Oh boy. All right, sure. Let's call this name, and then let's rename these to name. Bucket name, and then we're gonna say scope name, and then we're gonna say collection name. And you can definitely see I'm doing this out of the seat of my pants because I didn't even think through these variables to see how they're going to conflict. But this is literally how sometimes you code, right? So let's see here. Now it's going to be mad because the interface doesn't match the description here. Oh, good Lord. Let's go back to our interface. This is going to be name, and let's go back into our, this is once again why refactoring, usually using the rename function is way better because you don't have to go into files and go rename all these, right? Name, and name. And mock ain't going to do anything because mock, I mean, you can make a fake service, but really there's hardly any value in it whatsoever. Let's see here. So why is it mad now? Oh, just because code doesn't return results. That's fine. Bucket's going to equal this. And let's go in and return. Ooh. So let's do this. We need to change this out though. We need to say iBucket. Bucket equals null. We're going to get smart about this. We're going to say iScope. Scope and make that null, and we're going to make these nullable, and then we'll say Couchbase collection equals collection equals null, because then now what we can do is we can just go down to the bottom here and say return tuple of iBucket iScope, iCouchbase collection, and we're going to pass it in the values of those three interfaces we just made: bucket, scope, and collection. Oops, I started typing the word "and" instead of the comma. So now what should happen is if I just take this out. And why does it say that? Oh, why is it mad now? Oh. What do you mean generate new method? Oh, is it create? Yeah, that's what I'm missing here. Sorry, forgot that it's not a new thing. Getting back into C#. Man, I'm so used to syntax from Swift and Kotlin, and sometimes remembering. So you can see here, what are these saying? Scope may be null here. Oh, when we return them, these also should be nullable because you don't have to use scopes and collections. So this means I'll have to fix my interface implementation. Let's make these nullable. And if somebody, technically speaking, bucket should never be null, but in fact, let's make it that way. Let's say that bucket cannot be null, but the other two can. Because we're going to throw an exception. So we're going to say bucket is not null, but the rest of them are. And then we will need to go through and fix that in our interface. By doing this, we can make our framework where, you know, they don't want to use scopes and collections. No, I take that back because our goal was we're going to send them back to default scope and collection. I take that back. It should always be available. Yeah, we're going to take that back out and do that so that we're not going to use the null options for those. Instead, we will so bucket should work. It's just now scope and collection that's not there. So we're going to say now if, well, actually, it's scope and collection should automatically always get set. They always should be set to default if needed. So now we can just say, well, scope. In fact, we don't need to make these nullable because we know that they're eventually going to get set. Let's just make them like this. We're going to say scope equals await bucket. Now we have to wait for IntelliSense to try to catch up with us, which we're not really sure if it's going to or not. And I think it's scope async. And we're going to give it the scope name. And that should be it, even though, scope name. That should give it scope. Now, if I remember right, the collection comes from scope. So we can just say collection equals await bucket, or not bucket, scope dot collection async. And we'll just give it the collection name. That's it. And as long as those three all come back, oh, and I have to name it right, we have an implementation here. Look at that, folks. We should have a fully wrote up implementation that will now also go through and bring us back a bucket. So if we give it a bucket name, a scope name, and I'm going to try to make this a little bit easier to read by putting these down on a separate line so we can read all these separately. That should hopefully help with the readability of the code. And we're going to say, hey, we'll define our three variables. We'll make sure that the cluster is not null. We'll send them in. We'll create a tuple and return it. Throw exception if it's not there. And then, of course, to init it, we need to make sure that the stuff is not null for our config, and we're there to go. So it is 5 o'clock exactly. So it's almost like I timed this perfectly to say, hey, in the stream, what we're going to do. So here we have now a Couchbase service. We don't have it wired up yet to our inside of our configuration here so that you can get to it inside of ASP.NET. You know, we need to go through and register it, it's called. And that's something we'll do in program here. But the real problem I have is that we have this really cool dependency thing that does that for us, but it's not updated. So I'm going to go talk to the development team tonight, find out what's going on with that, see when that's going to get updated, and then I'll probably move over to using that instead. We'll see. But I think this is good enough for the stream. So the last thing I'm going to do is this will be available. It's going to be called Gems Base. It's going to be available from my GitHub. So let's go here and find my GitHub. So you can get to my GitHub. The link's down at the bottom there in the bar, but you can just go to github.com/Biazal, and this should work. There is me, and I don't have the repo up yet, but if we go to repositories, I've got quite a few here. Let's go So I do have one for Gembase.net. Is there any code in this? This may be the initial check-in I did before I went and moved these on to separate projects, it looks like, folks. So it looks like I already have a repo here. So it's here. It's called Gembase.net. I do, yep. So this is what I checked in last week. I do need to go through and fix this because obviously this isn't latest code. So, but if you, I'll update this tonight, and you should be able to go in and grab the codes if you want to see it, keep track of status and stuff. So, I'm gonna start this because it's pretty cool, and you can of course watch it by using the watch. I will have some stuff on the wiki here, with some links to the to some of the stuff we talked about today, like gamification. I'll have the link to the framework that I was talking about earlier today up there and stuff, so that if you want to read about gamification, you can. Join me tomorrow. I'll be doing this again tomorrow. Yes, it is. I checked my Twitch schedule. I do believe it's 12:30 tomorrow. 12 or 12:30 Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. We'll be going through, and I'll be continuing on this project, so we'll probably get the service up and running and talk to the database. A reminder that Mondays and Wednesdays, I will be doing mobile app streaming, and we'll be starting this Monday with Swift and using UIKit to build a really cool mobile app. So, again, thank you everybody for watching this on video demand. For the people that joined us during this stream, also thank you there, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next stream tomorrow. Take care. Stay